A lot can happen in a heartbeat. Car accident, aneurysm, hell, you can trip and fall in the shower in that short of time. Any number of tragedies can unfold so quickly that the time they take to happen is almost imperceptible. What's worse still about these moments is the butterfly effect that they can leave behind once they've come and gone. Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later takes this idea and thematically weaves it through from the first frame to the last. For the unaware few, 28 Days Later is a British indie zombie film from the early aughts. This was right around the time when the modern zombie renaissance was starting to ramp up, so you can call it a product of its time. On that note, if you'll allow me an aside within an aside, this film can be seen as a major stepping stone between the old idea of the zombie and the new, and that's speaking both literally and symbolically. Any serious zombie film worth its salt is symbolic of some grander societal or social fear. Just to give a few examples, Reanimator blended 80s gore with subtextual distrust of our self-serving medical industry, George Romero's Of the Dead catalog showed us a bitter former hippies' take on consumerism and civil rights, and even White Zombie, all the way back in the 1930s, contained a healthy dose of xenophobia under its surface. 28 Days Later not only gave audiences a look into the future with its gritty digital video shots of ruined cityscapes that would eventually dominate the subgenre, but it also shifted the symbolic focus to where it still largely rests today. 28 Days Later is a film about infection, about a bloodborne virus that takes hold of its victims stupidly fast and turns them into a raging infected, not zombie, another trend that's become more and more common recently. Just as more physical threats like nuclear war or communist conflicts were finally fading from the zeitgeist, this movie gave form to the mounting societal fear of a world-ending supervirus. Before this, it was kind of a free-for-all why and how zombies came about in fiction. You could blame it on anything from generic evil chemicals to black magic. 28 Days Later, however, chose a comparatively believable medical cause for its zombies, one that holds powerful symbolic roots in the AIDS crisis of the 1980s. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the film was a bit of a subtle game changer and reshaped the visual style and symbolic undercurrents of zombie movies. Getting back toward the point, I think it's high time for a plot recap. The condensed version boils down to a small group of characters cling to one another in a cross-country trek across England to try and reach the source of a military broadcast that promises them
the answer to infection.
What they find instead is a Chris Eccleston-led mansion full of soldiers who are so beaten down by the apocalypse that they themselves are more dangerous than the infected. Especially toward the women, if you get my meaning. With that formality covered, the film's true unique edge lies on a much smaller scale, which brings me back to the heartbeat motif that I was harping on in the beginning. This concept of the impact that literally split-second decisions can have becomes an open, running dialogue between Jim and Selina, our two leads. In fact, beyond just the two of them, this idea affects nearly every major character or story choice that's made throughout the entire film. But what's a statement like that without a good handful of examples? The movie hits on this point almost immediately, in the very first scene in fact, which shows us moment zero of the outbreak that ends the world, or at least Britain. It all started from a split-second choice on the part of some eco-terrorists to ignore the screaming doctor's warnings and release the infected chimps. Oops. And that particular oops cascades into hell on earth, and 28 days later, Jim faces down his first infected, lending us another example. This retching, twitching, infected priest could have very easily killed him, but his split-second choice to swing his bag of cans in self-defense, even though he wasn't positive why, saves his life. We can tell this wasn't premeditated and was a truly momentary choice on Jim's part because of A, how absolutely last second it was, and B, his immediate confused regret.
Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that.
He apologizes to his would-be killer because he swung before he had time to consciously think about his actions. But swung he did, and that gave him enough time to flee into the arms of some other, friendlier-ish characters. Selina and Mark's decision to save, trust, and subsequently accompany Jim to his parents' house affords us our next chronological example, and the first of them that goes past subtext. When Mark is bitten during a midnight infected fight, Selina notices, looks him in the eye, and kills the shit out of him. Not only does this show us, the audience, how unforgiving Selena, and by extension this world really is, they talk about it.
And just so you know where you stand, if it happens to you, I'll do it in a heartbeat.
This is the first of 3 times that Jim and Selena discuss this running in a heartbeat motif. Later on, there's this moment too, when Selena reinforces how serious she is about surviving.
Right, because if they slowed you down...
I'd leave them behind.
In a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Hey, have you noticed something about these momentary decisions? Because I did. What's really important about them, and what keeps the narrative flowing like water, is that each of these choices directly funnels into the next. It's a constant stumbling marathon of choice, consequence, consequence, choice, until the two become indistinguishable from one another. And I've just barely covered the first act. This formula carries through nearly the entire film. Seriously, I had like 20 other examples written, but I didn't want to seem repetitive. Even the main musical theme of the movie, which not so subtly includes the words "in a heartbeat" in its title, echoes this thesis beautifully with its slowly building notes evoking a literal, quickening heartbeat. What ends up being the most pivotal of these heartbeat decisions made is the payoff for Selena's character arc. With Jim's one-man infected-aided siege of the evil soldier's base creating chaos, Selena is unsure if he's dead or alive, until this moment, when she witnesses him brutalizing one of said soldiers. Now remember, she's told Jim to his face twice now that if he were ever infected, that she would kill him. It's been repeated, beaten into our heads because of how sure Selena was, or at least thought she was. Because right here, when faced with what anyone would rationally assume to be a raging, infected Jim, she...
That was longer than a heartbeat.
does not. Contrary to Jim's snark, this was still a momentary choice on her part, but it was a choice to wait, to see if he was okay. Inaction is action in this case. The film shows us time and time again how decisions made so quickly and rashly can often have disastrous outcomes. Whether that's Frank's frustrated kick at the wall leading to his infection, or the soldiers getting fresh with Selena before West was ready to spring his trap, causing, well, the entire climax. So, when it comes down to it, it's all the more important and powerful that Selena, the patron saint of "I'll chop you up if you give me any excuse," chooses temperance, to wait and see rather than just act. And she's rewarded for her faith, with her friend's survival, with some returned sense of humanity, and with the possibility that in the future, they won't have to just cope, that they can be okay. If you can accept thinking of 28 Days Later as a worldview picture, then I think this message of "please stop and think for a second" is a powerful takeaway. Obviously, this isn't a unilateral truth. Some of the instant choices made in the movie do have positive outcomes, but it comes back to the chain reaction, the butterfly effect that lists from moment to moment until it goes off the rails entirely, which is why it's so important to occasionally, maybe, make the decision to stop and wait, even if that choice is made in an instant, in a heartbeat.